Good evening and welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So tonight, it's a small crowd, but we have a lot planned for you, a lot of great things on the agenda. Unfortunately, that's not for tonight's episode, that's for a future episode. So we're going to stick with the same level of mid-level discussion of various topics and a little bit of trolling from the audience. So if this is your first time, welcome to Shop Talk. This is a chat interactive show. If you're here in chat, say hello. And also, do your best to derail me, because that is like 45% of the fun. But part of the fun is actually in the stories that we have. And we've got a couple of stories that we're going to talk about tonight in some detail. Anders would never derail me. This is true. Anders is known in chat as the re-railer. What he does is, after somebody else maliciously derails me with putting a penny on the track, Anders is like, hang on, let's get back on topic, please. And so that's 100% true. Definitely agree, 100%. 10 out of 10 stars. So we have a couple of things to talk about tonight. And in order to do that, I'm going to share my screen. We have our first post. This one comes from Axios, which is like Vox for kids. Nonetheless, I'm going to switch this so that it's larger and I'm not quite as large. I don't know what I think about that, but I do kind of, my ego appreciates the idea of having me be 80% and the article be this little 5% sliver. Like, yeah, of course we're talking about the article. Now, here's me. But Vista Equity, yeah, I 100% agree with Anders. I don't think I'm spoiling anything when I mention I don't like Vista Equity either. I don't tend to like most private equity firms, but here's what they've got. This is, like I said, from Vox for Kids. Vista Equity writes off Pluralsight value after a $3.5 billion buyout. So Vista Equity Partners bought Pluralsight. Pluralsight was a public held company. And Vista paid $20.25 per share, which added up to $3.5 billion, to take Pluralsight private. And about 3 years later, they've essentially said, we're writing off entirely. We're going to try to burn down as much as we can, sell off the scraps, and take whatever pennies on the dollar we can get. So in the article, they do mention that there's a 26% EBITDA margin in 2023. Now, I know many Shop Talk viewers probably don't know what EBITDA is. I know some people do. Marshall's in chat. I think Marshall would know EBITDA. And the idea of EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxation, depreciation, it's something like interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. The whole idea is if you take out a bunch of the big, heavy expenses and things that we have to pay, we're making a lot of money. And EBITDA came basically as none of these companies are profitable, and yet we still want to sink huge amounts of money into them. So we need a separate measure that makes it look good. And so let's take out all those things like capital expenses, depreciation, and amortization. Let's take out taxes, payments on interest for the massive loans that they've taken. None of that really matters. I mean, yeah, sure, the companies still have to pay that, and so they're not actually making money, but it looks much better when you report it as EBITDA rather than profit. I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek with that explanation of it, although that kind of is why a lot of startups and pre-IPO companies focused on EBITDA rather than actual profit, because very few of them were actually earning profit. Operating costs versus revenue. Yeah, adjusted EBITDA takes out stock option value and other things. So let's also take out the amount of money that we've promised our main people in the future. It is theoretically operating cost versus revenue, but at the same time, the depreciation and amortization are in there for a reason. You do have capital expenditures. That would get me on a whole nother rant about this notion of how private equity firms will take existing plants, existing land, existing facilities that companies own, sell those off, and then have the company re-rent them because it looks better on a margin sheet. And then, like 3 years later, when the company's paying more in rent than they did by owning it, well, the private equity firm is already sold out by then, so they don't really care. Which kind of gets to Pluralsight here. So Vista bought them up. The platform has not done fairly well in the past few years, and I think, look, this line is dumb. Some of the developer skills it teaches are becoming automated. Well, yeah, it's like automated testing. Guess what? You still teach testing. There's automated code generation. Let's go churn on my copy of rational rows and develop out my code. That's red herring. I think there is a problem. I think there's an interesting problem in the learning space, and being on the side of people, I'm more friendly with people who are authors for Pluralsight versus the Pluralsight management and employees. So I know more about the author experience than I do the Pluralsight internal experience. But I have also seen over the past couple of years how authors have repeatedly taken it in the shorts. And I do know a bit about a couple of other companies that are in this learning space where I still know how to do RPN on my HP 25, and we do have calculators, but still teach math. At least I hope we still teach math. I have bad news for you, Marshall. I have bad news. All right. Getting back to this, the experience of authors of these courses is their take has gone down considerably in the last few years. And it's not just on Pluralsight. It's on several platforms where you've gone from a royalty-based system, an open-ended royalty-based system, to a fixed amount that may or may not be generous, to a fixed amount that's really not generous at all. And part of it is a lot of companies have struggled turning the learning experience into something that they can profitably sell. So if you are a big enough name, you can drag enough people along to buy your courses and make money. There are people who are not big enough names, but they do consulting and sell courses additionally, which make up some supplemental income and kind of makes up for the margin. And so, for those people, they don't necessarily need the platform. There are people who are big and are on the platform. Like classic example, the SQL skills people they had a corner of Pluralsight where they developed quite a few SQL Server courses, and they did a good job. So, Jonathan Cahias, when Aaron Stellato was there, Glenn Berry, when he was there, Tim Radney had a few courses. They all did a really good job, as well as Paul Randall, Kim Tripp, etc. But then the real problem was not that, there's not enough content. It seemed like it was more that the way these manufacturers of Pluralsight, DataCamp, LinkedIn Learning, Lynda, etc., pick your company of choice. They are all angling for businesses to license their products, their subscriptions, because individual licensees can work but don't get you really far. For a long time, Pluralsight aimed itself at the individual developer. What does this developer, you're a C# developer. What do you want to learn about? Or, and really it was, .NET was kind of their specialty. But they did branch out. They had a lot of different courses, a lot of different content, and would pay authors essentially on a royalty system that made it so their risk that the company was taking was not huge. There were costs, so there was some level of risk. But if I had a Pluralsight course and nobody watched it, there was a one-time fixed cost of editing the course, of say checking that the quality of the course is sufficient. There were marginal costs of hosting the files, minor costs of bandwidth that, if assuming that the course was a dud, wouldn't even come into effect very much. But you expect relatively large initial cost of hiring a person to do the editing, hiring a person to do the content creation process, and ensuring that what I came up with fit what the course specification expected, having somebody kind of architect the courses. Much of that it was paid work. And so they would pay for that because they'd have either internal employees or they would have consultants that would build this out. And then the content creators would come in, fill those gaps, create the courses, and people would watch. And based on however many minutes you watched my course over all of the minutes of all Pluralsight viewers, I would get a percentage share of the pot. And so the people who created very popular, very successful courses would get a lot of royalties and had an incentive to keep updating the course, keep it fresh, keep it relevant so that they continue to get more money. The people who were on the less successful end, maybe there wasn't so much incentive. But that also meant a lot of open liabilities on Pluralsight's books. And so they had this royalty structure that was X percentage. But even though you could think of this as well, we have a fixed cap of how big that pot can be. And that pot grows based on how revenues grow. So it's not like there's an absolute point where the whole system falls apart. Although theoretically, if every Pluralsight subscriber watched videos 24/7 and just constantly watched videos, I suppose maybe there would be an issue in terms of going over expectations. And this is kind of leading into the liability risk, is that in Pluralsight's ideal world, you buy a subscription, you never watch any of their videos, but you do convince other people to buy subscriptions because it's a status symbol or something. In the practical best case scenario, you buy a Pluralsight subscription, you watch a lot of videos, you love it, you get other people to buy it as well. And possibly, even better than that, is you buy a Pluralsight subscription, you say, oh wow, our company needs this. You sell 500 subscriptions of Pluralsight within the company, 495 of which nobody ever uses, and yet the company's paying for it. So now you have the evangelist who is watching a lot of videos, who is getting a lot of value out of it, and then sells it to the marginals who might have watched a video one time, but they don't really care that much. And yet, when asked, do you want a Pluralsight subscription? They say, oh, of course I do. I need one of those for my job. As Anders says, my dollars per minute watch is huge. And that became me at the end with Pluralsight. I actually had a Pluralsight subscription that I paid for out of pocket for several years. I got a lot of value out of it. I have no qualms about that. Eventually, I did cancel it because I realized, okay, over the past year, I've watched 2 courses, 1 course. I just didn't have the time to do it, and so it made sense to cut it off at that point. With this purchase, they really pushed Pluralsight in the direction of we're trying to get businesses and not individual developers, individual practitioners. And that seemed to be the push for a lot of different learning platforms, that they're focused on the business case. They want the giant corp to buy 30,000 licenses instead of trying to sell 30,000 individual licenses. So what I believe they're finding is that's harder of a sale to make than they thought it was. That once the big company does buy 30,000, then you lose 30,000 because the company looks at the numbers and says, well, only 200 people have actually even opened up the website. And of those, 5 people have actually watched more than one course. So next year, instead of buying 30,000 licenses, we'll buy 5 licenses. And then if somebody else wants it, they can make a purchasing request that will take 3 months to finish up, and then we'll make it 6 licenses. And I kind of get the feeling this is what's happening. Again, I'm using Pluralsight as an example, as a hypothetical, versus Pluralsight, the actual company whose books I have no access to and whose internals I don't have any knowledge of. So this is more of the industry versus one company in particular. And so the other thing, reason number 14 or so that I absolutely hate private equity firms, Pluralsight has gone through multiple rounds of layoffs. Yeah, that tends to happen. Private equity company buys, say, we don't need 20% of you, lays you off. And then 8 months later, you find out, oh, I guess we did need some of these people. Well, it's okay, because we can get by for 2.5 more years, at which point we're going to re-IPO, make a whole bunch of money, and walk away and don't really care what kind of dumpster fire we've left. So I have not looked up Chris Walters, if Chris Walters is the type of person who is the skin 'em and dump 'em type. But, when you're replacing the founders tend to have more of a vested ego interest in the success of the company versus I need to make it successful 2 years from now when we IPO, at which point I don't have to care about its success afterwards because I've already cashed out. And that tends to be the short-term angle of a lot of private equity, which I think also was a factor in this case as well. So not a great thing for Pluralsight. By the way, I did not mention this. Hat tip here to the Brent Ozar newsletter. So this one came out today. It's where I picked it up. And, Red Lobsters, like Marshall mentioned in chat here, similar situation where you had a company. In that case, they weren't doing so great, but still had a fair amount of brand name, and yet we're going to trash it. We're going to burn it to the ground, try to get 8 cents on the dollar. It does happen, but we'll see what happens with Pluralsight. There is enough in the learning content space that, even if they go away, it'll be sad because, again, I liked Pluralsight. I could still recommend Pluralsight, especially if you are an application developer and you want to learn about how application development works. There's a lot of high quality there, and it tended to be much better of a filter than Udemy, which Udemy is somewhere, it ranges between some really, really good content, a lot of trash content, and a lot of stolen content. And so if you have that internal filter where you get rid of the trash content and the stolen content and you focus on the good stuff, you can find a lot of quality in Udemy. YouTube videos. As a guy who does YouTube videos, again, there's a lot of high quality there. There's a lot of low quality there as well. And generally, YouTube will be more of, I'm looking for a very specific item. I want this 10-minute video to show me how to create a new VM in Azure or something like that, versus the broader-based course where I want to learn all there is about Azure Virtual Machine Administration. Andrew says, you ever work for a company Vista buys, you have 15 months to get out. At least you have 15 months. Unless you're part of the first round of layoffs, in which case you didn't have those 15 months, but it happens. All right. Now, the real kicker story for today. I need to share this one. I'm gonna drop the link in chat first. This is Double Pulsar. This is Kevin Beaumont. Stealing everything you've ever typed or viewed on your own Windows PC is now possible with 2 lines of code inside the Copilot Plus recall disaster. This idea, Copilot Plus recall, on the last episode of Shop Talk, I think I made an oblique reference or two to it, but I had not learned enough about the product to hate it as much as I needed to. And Kevin Beaumont has done excellent work in explaining why exactly I needed to hate Copilot Plus Recall. So let me walk through. I'm going to spend a good amount of time going through Kevin's article because this is an amazing level of how did this idea get past the people who should know better at Microsoft. And this is a new Windows 11 feature, currently requires ARM processors and an NPU, but as Kevin points out later on, you don't actually need an ARM processor or an NPU. Easy, Microsoft has laid off all the same people. No, it's not even that. I don't know. It's something. It's weird. It's weird. They had Copilot in the name, so Microsoft greenlit it. But this takes screenshots of your computer and then makes it into a searchable database of everything you've seen, which I think I think Kevin mentions here, like this is, yeah, here we go. At a surface level, this is great if you're a manager at a company with too much to do and too little time, as you can instantly search what you were doing on a subject a month ago. But that's not most people. Most people, this is a personal computer. I don't want constant screenshots. Like when I have my banking software open, when I have private information, when I have whatever, what's happening is Windows takes a screenshot of your desktop of whatever's showing and uses a local endpoint of Azure AI's OCR. So it's doing optical character recognition of the screenshots, and it's taking that text and it's saving it in a SQLite database. That's all happening on your local machine, which Microsoft is selling as, well, it's very secure. None of the information is going up into the cloud. But, like Kevin mentions here, this could be an interesting, totally optional feature, but it would require a lot of careful communication, would require serious thought about security, which they didn't do, clearly, and would require serious engineering and implementation, which doesn't have. So work hasn't been done to package it together. There's a FAQ, which is more of, we're trying to snow you over to make you think that it's fine. And it's just not that great. So, okay, here are the details. The data is processed entirely locally on your laptop. Yeah, which happens. That is true. None of that information does get sent up to Azure for optical character recognition. So it's okay. Except that anybody could access it, because when you're logged into the PC and able to run software, the data is just right there available for you. And Microsoft quoted that a would-be hacker would need to gain physical access to your device, unlock it, and sign in before they could access saved screenshots. Or, I'll give you a wild alternative. They install malicious software on your computer, because viruses, they've happened on a few machines in the past. Windows has never really had a lot of problems with viruses before, but every few years you'll hear about a virus that affects like a couple hundred machines in the world. So it's theoretically possible. And that virus could look inside the folder because it's running under your authentication. Which, again, they would never do that. I mean, every virus maker, they're very, cognizant of user privacy and safety, and so they only do little prank things like create a notepad file that says, "Haha, you got a virus," and that's it. They'd never do anything harmful to a machine. Definitely would never look at sensitive info and try to steal it. That just doesn't happen. This is like watching Microsoft become the Apple Mac marketing department. Yeah, I love that line. So this is what Microsoft told me. Attackers would have to get physical access. Well, no, because I can demonstrate another user account on the same device can access the database as well. So how does it work? Every few seconds, you take a screenshot. Then these things get OCR'd by Azure AI running as an edge appliance, and then written into a SQLite database in a user folder. This database file has everything you viewed. By the way, there's no cleanup process for it, so it's there. And what does the database look like? Well, good news. It took Kevin, I think he said, I'm looking at the Twitter thread, and I'll drop the link to his Twitter thread as well. Because it took him, I think it was just a couple of days to sort out all of the details. And inside of this, basically, it's data and app data inside of a brand new folder called Core AI Platform. And there's a Scott Hanselman video where it's a TikTok where he's talking to some of the engineers behind it, and it's totally safe because it's just running locally. And the engineer opens up the relevant folder, and here it's all these amorphous blobs. Like, yeah, it's a SQLite database. So open up SQLite, read those files, you get your data. And you might even be able to see it in here. I know that the image is small, and I don't want to open up the page because then I'd have to bounce around and do stuff. But you can see all of the text. So all of the different applications that are running, text contents inside of the applications, and so on. So, all right. But normal users don't run as admins, except that they do, because this is Windows. If you're on a corporate PC, you may not be running as an admin, but maybe you are. And you also don't even need to be an admin to read that database, which is great. Solomon says it's a perfect time to roll out sudo commands to make it even easier to get admin privileges via password. Yeah, but if you do it right, you could get admin privileges without even putting in a password, so that's even better. What private Windows machine is not running admin? I have a work machine. Okay, private machine. Okay. Like I have a work machine where I can't even sniff admin. But a UAC prompt appeared in that video, and that's a security boundary. Well, except that it's not. So, where is the security? They tried to do a bunch of things, but none of it actually works properly in the real world. Cool. That's actually, I believe that totally. Does it automatically not screenshot or OCR things like financial info? Nope, it does no content filtering. So everything that is on your screen, bam. Our security people have banned Windows 11 for now, I think. Maybe, I think a fair number of companies will probably do that. It's a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction if it's specifically in response to this, but there have been several major security problems that have come out with Windows 11. So I could see that. How large is the database? At least it compresses really well. Several days worth of data is about 90 kilobytes. You can exfiltrate several months of documents and key presses in the space of a few seconds with an average broadband connection, which means that if one of those very few, very uncommon viruses ever affects your computer, which it probably wouldn't. I don't even know why I'm even bringing up the idea of a virus in a discussion like this. It's never going to hit any of us. But hypothetically, if it did just hit one of us one of these years, then they could exfiltrate basically the entire contents of this before your virus checker could sort it out, because that's actually one of Kevin's later points right here. It might have been this next one here. Have you exfiltrated your own recall database? Yes, I've automated the exfiltration, made a website where you can upload a database and instantly search it. So that's cool. In one of these later ones, he basically mentions by the time Windows Defender captured that he was doing something malicious, that he was reading through the secret database, he had already exfiltrated everything. So it blocked it later, but he already had all the details because it's not very much information in terms of space. So what kinds of things are in this database? Everything that you've seen ordered by application, every bit of text that you've seen, with some minor exceptions, specifically things like Microsoft Edge in private mode. But if you use Google Chrome incognito, no, that doesn't count. So one Chromium browser, private mode, will exclude. A totally different private mode for a Chromium-based browser. No, we can't possibly exclude that. That's That's absurd. That's crazy development. Microsoft could never develop something like that. I believe there are some processes that are privileged, such as installer, where that can lock things away even from admins. That sounds about right, yes, because there can be folders that even administrators could not technically get access to. But then there's some weird. My recollection is that there are weird security permissions where you can change the folder itself. So by default, it's trusted installer, but that you could change some of the permissions to explicitly grant an administrator permission to do it, and then the administrator could change the permissions to actually get it done. It's sort of the opposite of how you might lock down a folder to limit to only a specific user and even take administrators out of the batch. But an administrator, I think, is still capable of getting back in, especially somebody like a domain administrator. I think has permissions like that. A domain admin or a global admin could not create a scenario in which that user was incapable of performing a task. I could be wrong though. That was my recollection, but I have not dug into it enough to confirm or deny. So take that for exactly the 8 grains of salt that you'll need to make it work. It also stores all websites you visit, so that's cool. If I use some sort of like signal where it's supposed to be private connections and the messages automatically get deleted, will they stay around? Yes, they will, because they're all scraped by recall and they're all available. So, okay, during testing this with an off-the-shelf info stealer, I used Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which did detect the info stealer, but by the time the automated remediation kicked in, which took 10 minutes, the recall data was already long gone. So that was the comment that I had mentioned, where basically by the time the endpoint defense mechanism could actually stop it, it had already exfiltrated all the data. So the horse was already well out the barn door. So I wonder if I could use this database to post videos about my gaming. I like the way you're thinking, Anders. I like the way you're thinking. Does this enable mass data breaches? Yeah, because it turns out that, well, what if a bunch of people used Windows devices with recall and you exfiltrate all of their data and they have looked at different subsets of information on their forms? Like, pick website. Who are we gonna pick on today? Sony. I know the year is 2012. Sony has a data breach. Yeah, you have some bit of malware that gets in across the board at Sony, and let's say Sony has this turned on and everybody's using Windows 11 and they've got recall, and they're looking at internal customer data. Customer support people are looking at cases. You have a lot of situations where you might need to read sensitive or proprietary information about your customer base. Well, malicious software goes and takes all of the contents of those recall databases and sends them over to the attacker. The attacker aggregates this information together and may not get the full set of all customers, but could get a fairly significant set of a fairly significant number of customers, because we're scraping all of the form pages. It may take more effort than stealing a database that contains all the contents, but it is another mechanism to exfiltrate data. So, great. Did Microsoft mislead the British Broadcasting Corporation about the security of Copilot? Yeah, because, for example, they're claiming this is an optional experience, except that it is on default and you cannot directly disable it on installation. So you can check it after the fact, but again, do you have to do a registry update to this to disable? I think there may be a way to do it without ticking the registry update or without running regedit. I think, oh, here we go. In initial device setup for compatible Copilot Plus devices out of the box, you have to click through options to disable recall. In Enterprise, there's a group policy option. So you don't have to run a registry update. There are options that you could go to, but this is, asking Meemaw, hey, can you go into the Windows? Yeah, the thing, the blue thing, right. Click that. Now go. You got to go to settings. Yeah, type in settings with an S, settings, and then take this person through all of the various steps just so that we can disable this thing that should not have been on by default. And apparently GPO has been renamed, so it is no longer disable AI data analysis. Perhaps it is turn off saving snapshots for Windows, apparently. So that's good to know. What are the privacy implications? Blah, blah. Easy for you to say. Where's the EU when you need them? Actually, that's this question right here. Isn't this against GDPR? No, because the data is local. You are the data controller. So the data never officially leaves your machine. And as a result, Microsoft's not collecting that information. They're just making it very easily accessible for bad guys to collect the information. And, there are potential impacts, like if, say, spouse is looking up information on, in this case, the example is domestic abuse, then you might be able to search through that database and find what are these other people looking at. If you want to do a registry update, there is a registry update entry. Okay, so there are ways to disable Copilot recall feature via regedit. So you got that going for you. So yeah, Microsoft's not the data processor. You're the person responsible, and therefore GDPR, never heard of it. Is this really as harmful as you think? Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. Bad jokes aside, malware is an enormous problem. And if you're automating a system to collect all of the information that a person types in, which will include passwords, which will include sensitive information, bank account numbers, other details, anything that's shown in plain text on a page can get scraped. There's no way of blocking of that, of preventing, like, oh, that's your social security number. Oh, well. The main problem I have is it is on by default. That is the enormous problem, yes. A hypothetical solution that, actually, I think Kevin's on the ball here with, look, this sounds like a good idea for managers, maybe consultants, people who have dedicated work machines where they are constantly switching between tasks and want to be able to search for what was that thing that I was doing. This thing should absolutely not be on for personal machines. I don't really see any use case where for a personal device it makes sense. I think that what's happening is they're trying to set this up for, well, then Copilot in Windows 11 can search through all of that, and this becomes your input through a RAG pattern. And I could see that as, well, here's all the data. Now you can ask questions. On the 19th, I think I emailed Bob, and I can't remember what I promised Bob. And I can't find that email. And then Copilot says, oh, well, helpfully, oh, yeah, you emailed Bob and told him to do A, B, and C. Andrew says, for what my company does, there is no way we can have this enabled. I think it's going to be true for a lot of companies. I do not see, like, my company, no, they would riot. Cybersecurity would have an absolute cow. And I think a lot of companies will have that response, especially once they figure out that it's a very simple way. There's a very simple way to exfiltrate this data. There's a very simple way to read this data. It's not particularly secured. Marshall says, if not changed, this will become the new target to get personal data from individuals while trying to hack or collect data, because when you put all that info in one place, that's the target. Yeah, for sure. And it, I understand this is still in preview, but it's close enough to release time that I don't know how much security will go into it. I don't think there's enough security to go into it, because any mechanism that you can use to write to and read from, if it's in the user space, and malicious software can get to it. Even if it's another user, it turns out that, yeah, you can still read this database. And if it's on by default, it'll be on for the vast majority of personal PCs, because very few people go through the set of options that are needed to turn off data collection. And so, yeah, a lot of people will just leave it at the default, and that will make them very interesting targets for a new generation of info gatherers, because they have a quite juicy area where all I need to do is get access into this folder, and I can basically, it's like I've installed a keylogger on your machine and a screen scraper. Thanks for doing my job for me, Microsoft. So what should they do? In my opinion, this is Kevin speaking, not this Kevin. Recall, rework it to be the feature it deserved to be, deliver it at a later date. Review the internal decision making that led to this thing, because something went wildly wrong here. And he quotes Satya Nadella saying, if you're faced with the trade-off between security and another priority, your answer is clear: do security, unless it has Copilot in the name. So Microsoft needs a fifth man on all project sign-offs. I mean, and the thing is, I don't even want to rag on Microsoft about this, because, yeah, this was a really dumb decision. This was like grade A, bad choice. They do that. That comes out every once in a while. But it's not like every decision coming out of Microsoft is grade A dumb. I'm always afraid to click on comments. This is what happens when top management panics. I think this, honestly, here's leaving his article, moving toward my wild speculation. I believe, knowing that Windows 11 is trying their hardest to get you to click that little Copilot button. For me, it's in the bottom right-hand corner of my screen right here. And just try to get you to click that and ask it questions and integrate with it and eventually spend money on it. And they're realizing, oh, well, Copilot is going to have a hard time scanning through all of your data. And it would be so great if we had copies, text of your screens and your history and everything, because then we could use retrieval augmented generation. We could use that RAG pattern, and we could make answering questions more reasonable, because you could ask a question about, okay, so a week ago, I know that I was reading an article about salamanders, and I just cannot remember the link, and I can't find it in my history. Hey, Copilot, last week I was reading an article about salamanders. Can you give me that URL? And it can go through and it can find, oh yeah, here's the URL. Or you're thinking of some factoid that you saw in a blog post. The hypothetical idea can get past top management. Especially it has Copilot in it, and Microsoft is heavily in on Copilot and on Azure OpenAI, and trying to take full advantage of the bubble around generative AI. At least Copilot on this PC has game instructions for turning it off. There are ways to turn it off, which probably for the best for a lot of people. But basically, it seems like, based on the information that we have seen at public conferences, they're all in on generative AI. And as long as there's a bubble, they're one of the major players in it. And so they're trying to fit it in. You have something like, actually, let me pull up the article, because this one came from, learned about it from Ginger Grant. And Pure AI, a guide to picking the right Microsoft Copilot for your task. And you say, Oh, hey, this is by Ginger. Okay. So Ginger wrote it, Ginger linked to it. I learned about it from Ginger. There we go. How many copilots could there possibly be? Well, yeah, there's Copilot in the Edge browser, and you can ask it some stuff. There's Copilot in Windows 11. There's the phone app for Copilot, so you can also use that. I mean, these are, pretty similar. There's a pro version of it that gives you faster response times and more images per day. There's Copilot in Microsoft 365, which really think of that as, let me see if she's going down. Yeah, there are multiple Copilots because you've got one for PowerPoint, you've got one for Excel, you've got one for Word, you've got one for M365 administration. GitHub Copilot, which was the original Copilot that was wildly successful, and Microsoft decided we are going to name all of our generative AI solutions Copilots so that we can clamp onto that positive brand name. But GitHub Copilot. Microsoft Fabric has a Copilot. And actually, technically, I think there are a couple of them because there's one for Power BI. And then I think there's a separate one for other components of Copilot. But yeah, also in notebooks. So arguable about whether it's one or two. Copilot for Azure and Azure SQL Database. Copilot for Azure, I've seen demos of this, and it is cool. I wouldn't trust it with everything, but write me an ARM script that creates a new virtual machine with a static IP address, needs to fit into this virtual network, and lock it down. And then, come up with as close to a positive result as possible. Solomon says, I wonder if this recall idea came from an experiment in having an AI replace an upper level manager or VP. I mean, okay, joking aside, one of the most interesting things, and I'll get back to Ginger's article, but Solomon derailed me. Anders, you have to re-rail me, quick. One of the interesting things that I had read about today was somebody making the argument that it won't be the truck driver who gets automated. It'll be the email jobs, the email class. It'll be the people who create meetings, go to meetings, and then tell people what came out of meetings. It'll be the people who work entirely in numbers and spreadsheets, because those are things that you can, like you have the classic T-shirt, go away or I'll replace you with a very small shell script. And you'll find how many people's jobs could be replaced with very small shell scripts. I listened to stories about people who supposedly do work. They get paid. They go into the office. They do stuff. They get yelled at for not being good at it, but they do stuff. And I listen to the things that these people are supposed to do, and it's like, you're taking a spreadsheet, you're taking the contents of cell A1 and the contents of cell C1, and you're adding them together into E1. And then you take all of the contents of E and you multiply them, or you add them all together and multiply it by some constant weight. And this is a thing that they're taking a significant portion of their days doing. And I'm thinking that's like 20 minutes of development time. How is this a job? And so if you want a world where jobs disappear, those are the types of jobs that you can get rid of easily. Will it actually happen? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I've been replacing those people with SSRS for years. Yeah, I mean, that's, again, let me find the T-shirt, because I liked the T-shirt. Here we go. This is a variant of it, but good enough. I've seen this T-shirt for at least 15, 20 years, or variants of this T-shirt. Generative AI is it would do something similar in that scenario. We heard about those types of jobs 25 years ago in office space, and people are still justifying it as a job that a person should be doing and that they should be compensated for it. And they get mad when they're replaced with something that's actually functional, efficient, and useful. All right. I'm going to tell a very highly redacted story that I don't think anybody in chat would know. It's basically a group of people were given the task, data scientists given the task, hey, tell us about a way to measure the likelihood of some event occurring. And there were already several employees whose job it was to essentially act sort of like an actuary in this regard. We're trying to measure the probabilities and then measure the consequences of that. And they spend their entire days doing this. Well, data science team comes in, comes up with a result, and the initial results are like, oh, that's really cool. That's great. That's great. And then find out that the results were actually better at predicting than what these subject matter experts were generating, and also did it in an automated fashion. Subject matter experts realized, wait a minute, this is what we do all day. What's going to happen to us if our entire jobs go, you don't need that anymore? And on the one hand, you could say, well, you can do something else. On the other hand, I would have to do something else. And therefore, they stopped using this thing. Even though it was more successful than what they were, they stopped using it. It went away. And just project disappeared. That happens. So, yeah, we are absolutely justifying. I'm the people who interfaces between the developers and the users. We're absolutely still justifying those jobs. And that's also why I'm very hesitant to say I don't think many jobs will be replaced by generative AI. Not on net. Some of them, yeah, there will be some companies that will do it. Some of those companies will screw up royally, as Anders alludes to. Others will probably, take a bunch of the lowest end jobs that they're already paying a small amount of money for and try to replace them with bots. But then you have to pay for the bots. You have to pay for the hardware. You have to pay for the electricity. You have to pay for the training time. And you have to have people to make sure that the bots don't go completely sideways in terms of, hey, we'll sell you this car for $1. So even in that scenario, I'm not sure that there would be a whole bunch of jobs. But truck driver, that I don't think automation of trucks is happening anytime soon. Not on a major scale. There are still enough manual tasks on a vehicle. There are enough manual tasks on the logistics side of things that you couldn't have a fully automated driver anyhow, because the trucks don't support it. The highways don't really support it. The infrastructure's not really there. It'd be a real tough task to refuel a truck that doesn't have a driver. Long haul truck drivers, maybe like distro center to distro center. And there are some discussions of that where you could potentially do this. But even then, you'd still need a lot of logistics to be in place to get to that point. And then the question is, how much are you paying to make it so that you have a signal that you can send the automated driver that, hey, we have finished unloading the truck, take it from bay number 6 and move it to bay 14 so that you can get loaded again. Or as the truck is coming in, come into bay 13. And oh, by the way, there's something in the way here. So you may need to divert around it. And even more, if there's construction, if there's police flagging down vehicles, if there's oddities on the road, these are things that are challenges, not insurmountable, but the types of things that driver assist solutions today basically bounce it down to, well, there's a driver in the car, driver can figure it out. And this gets even more challenging. Like, think about construction vehicles. Think about cement truck drivers. They have to be able to work with a lot of different signals from construction crews in a construction site where there isn't a well-marked road and easy navigation lanes. Yeah. Whereas, again, if your entire job is copying cells from one cell in Excel to another cell in the same spreadsheet, that's a lot easier of a task to automate. All right, in relation to AI, Marshall says, I really like this story from last weekend. The pace of innovation in AI is slowing, its usefulness is limited, and the cost of running it remains exorbitant. Wow, it's like we're living in the 80s again, except without nearly as many good movies. So this does come from the Wall Street Journal. Marshall dropped a link in chat. I will get back to Ginger's article. But basically, the headline, so obviously I have not read the article, but that bit that Marshall quoted, I'm in general agreement there. I think we're in the top, maybe starting to crest down in the hype cycle, because you had that generative AI is going to be able to replace everything. Absolutely. We're just one generation away from Skynet. OpenAI is building things that are scary, man, says Sam Altman, a circus ring showman whose entire job is to fluff up OpenAI so that people think it's more serious than it really is. The fad will move on to the next thing among the clueless that are private equity. And the cycle completes. They're trying to chase the next big thing at an early stage rather than trying to figure out solutions and develop something that will sustain. Yeah. Not even a conspiracy theory. All of the money that was going into blockchain and crypto, they took it out and put it into generative AI. Like as soon as the blockchain bubble started happening, they're like, oh, well, here's some new reason to use a whole bunch of GPUs. NVIDIA was happy because they sold GPUs either way. But yeah, I see this same cycle every year or two. Yeah, this is pretty common. And what'll happen is the hype goes away. You hit the Gartner hype cycle. And for the kids in the audience who have never had to deal with a Gartner hype cycle, let me pull it up. I gotta find the right image of it though. Yeah, this is a good image. Hey, this is even an emerging technologies hype cycle. So let me open that up in a new tab. There we go. So this one was from 2015, and we'll get to see some of the things. It's like an OODA loop gone horribly wrong. So the idea here, the hype cycle, is we start off, you have a trigger, some new innovation happens, and then people hear about it, and you start fluffing up the press, and they start writing articles about how this is the new big thing. You get to the peak of inflated expectations where it's going to be dominant. 5 years from now, people will be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe people thought the Internet of Things wasn't going to be this amazing phenomenon. Everybody's constantly buying Internet of Things everything. I got my cereal box. It's got a Internet of Things attached device so that I can upload my current percentage of cereal consumed. And then when that hype hits its max, people start realizing that no, it's kind of dumb. And we get into the trough of disillusionment. So the trough of disillusionment is, wow, I can't believe these idiots thought that this was going to be the case. It's the natural counter reaction to, you fluffed this thing up well beyond what it really is. It is an emerging technology that may or may not be good, and you had to go here. And then some technologies, many of these collapse. So you'll notice there's a whole bunch of dots early on and many fewer dots near the end. That's because what happens is, after the trough of disillusionment, a whole bunch of these dots just fall off the map. Some of them get to the point where we have the slope of enlightenment, where we say, okay, obviously the hype was overblown, but there are things of value that we can find in here. Enterprise 3D printing. Actually, that's a pretty decent one. And, that's a thing where we are seeing more 3D printing. I'm not 3D printing a car, but I am 3D printing devices. We're manufacturing certain items as 3D print. We're finding some of these things are cheaper and easier to do as 3D prints instead of other versions of like essentially creating other resin-based models. But, some of these things do pick up and then eventually hit the plateau of productivity where they're just normal desktop computers. At one point, desktop computers were in the hype cycle. They were at the top, and there was a bit of a collapse, and then eventually became generally productive. We know what we get out of them. Nobody considers them wildly exciting new technology. And, you get that. Note that crypto exchange is at the bottom of the trough there in 2015. They were way off there. That was still on the upswing and just took a breather. Yeah, there have been a few hype. Like I see certain crypto things bouncing back up and down a few times. But that's the hype cycle. Basically, a whole bunch of things come in. Some of them become eventually useful. Most of them, especially early on, there's a huge marketing arrangement to try to make these things exciting. And some of them eventually become useful. So wrapping things up, just to make sure we get through Ginger's article. Copilot for Dynamics 365, Security Copilot. Hey, maybe they could combine that with Recall so that it could say, hey, that Recall database looks like a big security problem. But it's $2,900 a month, so do with that what you will. 10 different Copilots, without including the Copilot plus Recall. Although, again, that probably is tied into Windows 11 Copilot. But yeah, a lot of Copilots, a lot of stuff going on. We are going to wrap things up. So with that, let me maximize myself so that I can say, remember, next Tuesday, we will have our Advanced DBA meeting. Third Tuesday, main meeting in person at Tech Systems. Fourth Tuesday, Business Intelligence and Data Science meeting. I did not detour you once. I know you appropriately, well, no, I'm not finishing that sentence because I saw where that one was going, but you did not derail me. You didn't re-rail me either, but it was stable. And with that, everybody, until we see each other in another edition of Shop Talk or a SQL Server user group meeting, take care.